It's a great one. I think Rolling Stone said that was the best song ever in one of their lists many years ago. But no, you just clarified something for me a few minutes earlier about athletes and how they'll all tell you that you remember the losses way more than the wins, and it will still burn you up when you think back on it. And I had Tom Tolbert, he does radio and other things out here. He played with Steve Kerr on the Arizona team
Oh,
that
no
nearly
kidding.
won the championship. And that's all fresh, even though it happened, I think, in the 1980s. And that's all just fresh. And I remember, it sounds crazy, but it is traumatic for them if it's a certain situation. The Warriors, when they had that 73 win season, this historic season in their midst, and they lost that final series from up 3-1. And I remember, because we were interviewing them the next day, and they were just so shaken. Like, they're just shaken in a way that I'd never remember them being. And I guess that's why those memories are powerful, because they're traumatic. And the joy of winning, that's glorious, that's beautiful. If you're around a team that wins a championship, it's a really fun thing to be around. It's like a wedding, but it's just this different, crazy explosion of a thing. But that's not going to stick. The trauma sticks with us, probably because it's the wiring keeping us from getting ourselves killed. The painful memories are more
the
valuable.
whole, loss aversion bias, and the negative is paid more attention to than the positive of equivalent intensity on the other end of it. Because like the way I always think of it is like, false positives are annoying, but false negatives will kill you. Like that's a big deal. So if you got to choose, if you're a brain and your whole goal is to keep yourself and the organism that encases you alive, and you have to err on one side or the other, you're going to err on blocking things out or taking actions that block more things out and possibly block some good things out than an action that lets a lot of things in and possibly lets some bad things in. One is the survival rate for the other is just a lot better, even though you might get some good experiences out of it.
Well, and it probably connects a bit to the public shame aversion, because one of the things about these big losses and why they're traumatic is they happen in front of everybody, which you end up learning, as you said in your video and your essay, that it's not that big of a deal in the end, but it feels like it. But I think it's this wiring from back in the day where if the other villagers start whispering about you and start not liking you, the stakes are potentially mortal. You might get a rock to your head. And that's why it's so crazy to me, though, that what's happening on this phone I'm holding up, it's just in this box. I walk around, it's not real. And yet I've been in these situations sometimes where I have some sort of controversy that I'm in, and it's only happening in this little box. Maybe somebody I run into will have heard about it, but it feels like you hear your heartbeat in your ears. And it's just, what is that thing where even with the abstractions that we are privy to right now, it still feels like I'm back in the village and everybody's going to kill me and my whole life is unraveling. It's just mad. It's madness to me, but everybody feels that way who's ever in that kind of public profile position.
Yeah, and we are just not designed.
Yeah.
For constant information from all around the world, instantaneously accessible. We're just not designed for that. There's a great episode of the old Batman Begins, Batman the Animated Series commercial, cartoon in the first season. They got, he teams up with Ra's al Ghul's daughter to face this villain. The villain's name, the creativity of the 90s, the villain's name is called Vertigo, right? And what Vertigo could do is he could make this illusion and disrupt your whole sense of balance, and you'd fall no matter where you were, okay? And Batman defeats him. And Ra's al Ghul's daughter's like, how'd you do that? And he says, I just closed my eyes. And not always that, like I haven't seen that episode, man, what am I, 40? It's been at least 30 years. But that always stuck with me. He just closed his eyes. And that's what
Oh
you have
man.
to do with a lot of this stuff. There's so many distractions. And okay, I don't like to use the word distraction because that always comes up in conspiracy theory. What I'll say is there are so many different things that can compete for your attention. And your attention
Noise.
is a finite source, so the more you divide it, the smaller each slice you get. So
Yeah.
eventually you end up with zero. But unlike but you're scattered. You're not you're completely divided, and then you're reacting to everything because that feels like something you have
Mm.
to do, but you don't. And one of the hardest things for people to accept, uh, and it's kind of dismal, but it's true, is that in most cases, no matter how or bad something is, it's really not much you can do about it. So now you got to decide, okay, since I can't physically intervene in this, or take enough collective action and willing to put myself in the line to do that, what do I do now? Do I want to feel bad, or do I want to focus on what I can control? And that is very difficult. That's a choice that most of humanity continues to
Yeah.
fail at, and the media profits from it so much. It's crazy. Another essay I wrote about this was about how they've tracked this in different research studies. How negative information spreads like 5 to 7 times faster than
Oh
positive
yeah.
information through networks. And Elon Musk said on Twitter one day, he's like, we're trying to figure it out, but unfortunately, the algorithm can't tell the difference between what's good or bad. It's just what gets engaged with.
Mm.
And that really hits home. If you look at all of this stuff, there's so much stuff you could engage with, and you're designed to engage with it. The
Oh
media and the headlines, they're taking advantage of an ancient pathway in our brain, and we don't really have a choice but to fall for it if we try to look at any of it. So all you got to do is the only thing you can do if you want some sanity is just kind of close your eyes, metaphorically speaking, not.
man, that close your eyes story reminds me of a story from sports, because it's not just the distractions, it's also that these social media platforms are these mimesis engines where they compel people to act in a certain imitative way. And I wish I knew all the details of this, but back in the 1990s, where I grew up in San Diego, the Chargers were not a very good team, but they had an excellent defense at different times. They'd have a bad quarterback, and Junior Seau
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Rodney Harrison, they were just doing everything they could with no support. And the coordinator at the time, he was asked about something that was just really interesting. Around that time, the Broncos with Mike Shanahan had this amazing run blocking scheme, this amazing rushing attack. And I don't know the particulars. I'm not a football expert, but the basics of it were that their guys were blocking at a diagonal, and then at a certain point, the running back would cut in the other direction diagonally, and it worked. It worked really, really well, except against the Chargers. And so they asked the defensive coordinator after he'd been retired, just why? Why do you have the most successful stats? And he said, look, that scheme, it only works because you go with it. It only works because the impulse is to push back in the direction from which you're being pushed in that position. Again, don't quote me on the details about this. I'm recapitulating some I read over 20 years ago. But we decided we're just going to run forward and act as though those blocks aren't even happening. We're just going to run forward. We just hit them in the backfield again and again. We didn't do that weird impulse, to push back in the direction from which you're being pushed, which I guess is instinctual in that particular sport at that particular time in that particular era. And I think there are a lot of things like that where it only works if you go with it.
Yeah.
This argument that makes you look bad only works if you accept the premise. There's a lot of that where if you just reject this compulsion to imitate what you're seeing or to engage with it in the way that you think you need to, there are a lot of positive things that you can accomplish, but by having that in mind.
Yeah, that story in sports. A lot of boxing is like this, in that it's I won't even say tempting. It's very easy to follow a flow of a fight and to get into the other guy's rhythm. So what we are, if you're around some good people, because that's a whole other basket of worms. But what you're supposed to be trained to do is to always try and take the initiative, and that's not just in the offense, in the sense of attacking, but also in ring generalship, how you move a guy around the ring or move around to respond to a guy. And one of the worst places you can be, I mean, like the worst, I think, um, strategy you can let yourself fall into. And I use strategy very loosely here because it's not really a plan so much as you fall into a trap, I guess, is if you start following the other guy in any way, then you've given up the initiative, and now they're going to dictate what happens. But if you're even if the guy's like not technically sound or has a lot of power, if he is just oblivious to to your abilities, nothing will happen. You know what it's like too. Here's another way to make this even more clear. The hardest people, poker is really interesting in this way, right? So as you get better at playing poker, because you're playing with better people and you can adapt to it, you realize that you have to temper your bluffs and you have to check and call and raise and do certain things to trick the other good players because they're so advanced and they can read and they understand the game. They're going to be watching you the whole time, trying to figure out the way you play and what to do, and vice versa. But this only works if they know what they're doing. If you're playing a new player, and they don't know anything about reading or tells,
They're off script.
You're gonna be sitting there going, okay, is that first you're gonna go, okay, he's definitely bluffing. And he's not bluffing, he just sucks, and you just lost a bunch of money. Like and so when you let when you let anything external to you dictate your plan, or rather when you need a plan sometimes. I'm not saying don't have a plan, but you have to look and go, what do I get? What are the rules of engagement here? And with the context that we got into this with, which is a lot of the media and the negativity and the theft of attention. The only way to, what does he say? The only way to win this game is to not play it. That's the only. Like there's no one. I've tried my hardest, and I think I've done a pretty good job. I think I've done a good job of not becoming biased towards any one claim, and that's cost me followers sometimes or the other, because sometimes someone on the left will say something outrageous. And I can't stand a bad argument. If that's how you feel, that's how you feel. I have nothing against your feelings. I can't argue those. But when you're trying to argue something with facts or poor reasoning, I've got to check it. Likewise, on the right, same idea. Okay? But when you do that, when you try to keep your mind clear and just not get caught up in the emotional hype, you get to see that most people cannot do this